Hello. Thank you for joining us today for Planning for Negotiation Success. My name is Mark Sharp. I'm the Director of Marketing for Red Bear Negotiation Company, and I'm pleased to have you with us today. Before we get started, I'd like to take us through a couple of housekeeping issues. So as we get started here, this recording will be available on demand after today's session. Also, feel free to submit questions at any time. We'll be doing Q&A throughout and at the end of the session. So as you have questions, go ahead and select the question mark and go ahead and enter those questions in. And then if you could, please complete the exit survey, letting us know what you thought of today's session. And any ways we might be able to improve on that for future sessions. So before we get started, a little bit about who Red Bear is. We are a global performance improvement firm dedicated to maximizing the profitability of agreements negotiated with suppliers, customers, partners, and colleagues. Our consultants have been delivering in over 15 different languages globally and have worked in North and South America, Asia, Europe, Africa, and Australia. We help organizations reduce costs, increase profitability, manage risk, increase internal alignment, and support achievement of critical corporate goals. Our proven approach helps our clients achieve desired business results and significant improvements in human performance. Some of our top programs are situational negotiation skills, negotiating with suppliers, and cross-cultural negotiations. We also have other programs focusing on internal and teamwork negotiations, as well as advanced courses in both sales and procurement. Well, the way that we do it is custom tailored workshops. We work with our clients to design negotiation exercises around real world scenarios to help speed the application of new skills developed in the workshop. And we use that with discovery-based learning, where folks are able to practice those skills and see how they work, and then practice new skills and see how they work. And then it's a continual process of improvement through discovery-based learning. I'm pleased today to have Erhan Imamoglu with us today. Erhan is an entrepreneur and well-known corporate trainer. He began his career in training after attending a seminar that overwhelmed him with a new set of skills that he thought he could never attain as an adult, believing that such skills were hereditary. After discovering that he too could develop new skills, he became a corporate trainer, and the rest, as they say, is history. Erhan, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you being here.
Well, likewise, thank you for having me, Mark. I hope I'll be able to convey a lot of important messages all throughout the time that we have together.
Great. So why don't we get started with a little bit of a baseline poll question. I'm going to go ahead and launch that now for the group. What we're interested in finding out is, do you have a structured process for negotiation planning? So if you could, in the poll question below the video, if you could just let us know, do you have a structured process for negotiation planning? So why is having a structured process so important?
Well, I'm going to take you through this in detail, but before we go into the finite details of this, I think it's critical to understand that structured planning in a negotiation has a lot to do with how you feel about your power in a negotiation. So if you want to be able to protect your position and feel powerful during the course of a negotiation, I think it's quite critical that you plan ahead and apply that planning during the course of the negotiation that you're conducting. So that's why I'm going to refer to this in detail as we go along, and it's so critical that we understand this process.
So let me go ahead and end this poll here. And so the results were 62% of attendees tonight had said that no, they do not have a structured process, and 37% said they do have a structured process. So that's good news.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, if I can help the folks that don't have one, that's just great. But I think I'm going to be able to also support those who feel that they have a structured plan in place as well, with some ideas and approaches that they may be able to adapt to the current structure that they have. So I'm hoping that all throughout this session, it will be both a learning process, but also maybe also revision of what they currently have as well. But for those 62%, I think I'm going to be able to help a lot.
That's great. That's great. So why don't we just jump right into it?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start off with a fun topic. And the fun topic is these three words. These three words actually have a lot to do with negotiating. Recipe, map, and chess. Let me explain these. Now, recipe, as you know, you need to have ingredients to prepare a certain dish. Whether this is a salad or it's a complex dish, you probably need to have, first of all, your ingredients, your directions towards how to prepare that dish, and finally, what you want to end up with. So you have a process. Looking at map kind of gives you a guideline in terms of your directions. You want to be able to understand the directions. You start from a point A and end up at a point B, but you want to be able to also have that route designed for you so that you feel comfortable with your directions. And the last one is chess. If you ever play chess, even if you're an average chess player, what they teach you is that you need to kind of predict 2 or 3 moves ahead in order to be able to succeed and win that chess game. And negotiation has a lot to do with all 3 of these concepts. First of all, in a negotiation, you need to have your ingredients. And you need to predetermine those ingredients carefully, and you need to really plan for that. Then you need to have a certain process, or let's say directions in place in terms of how you are going to put those ingredients in a more cohesive manner so that you would be able to, again, succeed in a negotiation. And last but not least, you need to act like a chess player, meaning you need to be able to really fine-tune your anticipating skills. So you need to be able to anticipate. Anticipating is basically trying to figure out what your counterpart will be doing during the course of the negotiation. So, like I said, these have a lot to do with negotiating. Let me give you an example because I think it will be more clear to everyone if I am going to be able to provide an example. My example is going to be an easy one. It's going to be from selling a car. Let's say you own a car and you decide to sell this car, right? And you're going to meet with someone today to sell your car. Now, normal practice that I come across when I do my trainings or when I see people negotiating, when they're trying to sell something like this, is basically they do this. They provide an offer. In return, they expect to have a counter offer. And back and forth this goes along, and it all turns into an arm wrestling situation. Because people tend to act instinctively, thinking, I can sell this car. There's no problem with that. I saw a lot of people selling cars. It can't be that difficult. So what I should do is just make an offer or expect an offer from the other side. And, whoever has the strongest arm at the end of the day wins. So this is like instinctively people approach negotiation in this manner. And those folks who do not have a structured process in place probably have at one time or another witnessed this situation happening in their negotiations. So this is the current situation that we are in.
So it seems as if it's got to be some other way than an arm wrestle, especially in the business world. I mean, to just go ahead and constantly go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, there's got to be a better way.
Well, actually there is. But funny enough, people tend not to lean into that better way. I don't know why, but I think there is a couple of explanations which I will go into. But what happens is that people prefer to go to the easy path, which is, I'll just make an offer. This is all about price. Well, it can't be about anything else. It's a no-brainer. I just make an offer and the other side gives me a counter offer. If I agree to that, we come to a deal. But guess what? Sometimes it ends up that you lose or the other party loses. To answer your question, Mark, there is a better way. Now, a better way is actually a scientific way. And the science behind this was kind of also won a Nobel Prize, by the way. And it was a research done by Daniel Kahneman. And this is in 2002, where he won the Nobel Prize for economics with his research on psychology, and he linked that to economic science as well. And what he was looking at was, how do people reach a decision in a situation when there is uncertainty prevails? Okay, so how do people make decisions when there's uncertainty? And guess what? Negotiation is a situation where there's a lot of uncertainty. So Daniel Kahneman actually can guide us in terms of how to better negotiate. Now, his research finding was this. He had found that there are two thinking processes in our brain. One is called System 1, and the other one is called System 2. System 1 is actually the fast automatic thinking process. It's not really a conscious process that we put in place. To give you an example, it's like, what is the outcome of 2 plus 2? Okay, so it's an easy process. You employ System 1 and you come up with the result. Now, System 2 is a slow and logical process. It's like calculating something like 343 times 17. You need to employ the System 2 at this stage because it's a complex problem. The System 1 brain cannot handle this. To be able to come up with the result of 4,131, you need to be able to do a calculation, put logic behind it, and you need to be able to really put some effort and time behind it as well. Now, my proposal to everyone in this, let's say, webinar is adapt a System 2 approach. Let me try to explain to you what System 2 is then. Okay, so if you have a question like, is there a better way? My answer to you all is yes. Let's go along System 2. Even though it requires effort, even though it requires time, System 2 will give you better results at the end of the day. Obviously, I cannot guarantee 100% success as a result of this, but I think I can guarantee you somewhere around 70 to 80% success if you can employ System 2 process thinking in your negotiations. For System 2 to really work in your favor, you need to go back and look at a couple of things. First thing is you need to really decide on the ingredients that you're going to put into System 2. Okay? And number two, you're going to have to really have a System 2 process in place, meaning have some directions, just like you would have in a map. And last but not least, you need to be able to anticipate. The beauty of adapting the System 2 approach is that you now have the opportunity to be able to predict what the other party is going to do in a negotiation. And that's actually very important because you don't want to be caught with surprises during the course of a negotiation. Let me give you a couple of ideas in terms of how this is going to work for you and how this would be one of the things that you can plan during the course of your negotiation or before even entering a negotiation. First of all, the first ingredient that you need to kind of put into this negotiation is the case that you have in front of you. This could be a problem or an opportunity. I'll call this a case because it's like handling a case. It's like solving a case. Have you ever been in a workshop where people give you a case to solve? Negotiation is no different. You have a case or a problem in front of you which you need to solve. The second ingredient that you need to think about when you are in a negotiation is you need to really have a target in mind. And this target, I would highly suggest that needs to be high as possible. I won't go into detail with that, but as most of you probably know quite well, those who set high targets achieve more. So what I would recommend is when you have a target, set a high target. The third ingredient, obviously, in a negotiation is the other party. So the person that you're negotiating with, so your counterpart. Now, these ingredients need to be molded together so that you have a good outcome. So how do we do that? We need to have a process in place. And that's what I'm going to share with you right now. Now, before I go into the process, Mark, can you help me out here? Can we put together this poll where I've asked who likely has more power in a negotiation? Can you kind of elaborate on that for me, please?
Yeah, sure. So let's go ahead and start that poll for the group. And it is, who typically has more power in a negotiation, the buyer or the seller? So in typical negotiations, without much thought, who do you assume has more power in that negotiation?
Let's see the outcome, because I think this is important. I do this poll a lot in my trainings, and I have a figure in mind, but I'd like to see the audience, what they have to say for this important poll for me, because then I'm going to go into the process to help them out understand who has more power.
Yeah, so we've got about 30 more seconds open for this poll, and we're starting to get some results coming in. So in just a few seconds, we'll be able to close up that poll. So go ahead and get your votes in, and then see those final tabulations. Okay, this poll is going to be closing here in a couple of seconds. All right, let's see what our final totals are. So I'll give it a little bit to see if it adjusts there, but it looks as if the audience has said that the buyer, 75% of the time, has the power in the negotiation. 25% of our group said the seller has more power.
Okay. Interesting. I get this a lot. I get around 88% saying the buyer has more power, and a small number of people say that seller has more power in the negotiation. To be honest, it's situational. And the situation is really dependent on how well you plan for that negotiation. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now, because once you have your ingredients, the case, the target, and your counterpart in the negotiation, and always the counterpart is the person that you're dealing with, then you can put together a process in place to shift, or let's say to tilt the power to your advantage. In order to be able to do that, in order to be able to tilt the power to your advantage, here are a couple of ideas that you need to think about. Number one is that if you have a case in front of you, a problem in front of you, before you go into a negotiation, like all of us do have that, first of all, we need to convert that case into a question. Okay? So once we identify that problem and convert it into a question, we are now in a unique position to come up with solutions to those questions that we created. To make it more scientific, I call these hypotheses. As you all probably know, hypotheses are solutions that require validation. So that brings us to the third step of our process. The third step is basically trying to validate the solutions by analyzing. So during the course of the negotiation, let's say these are two that you do it pre-negotiating, but during the course of the negotiation, you analyze with your questions the situation that you are in. If you can craft these two properly before a negotiation, what you end up with is basically shifting, or let's say tilting, the power to your benefit. Now, during the negotiation, if you can conduct a proper analysis, and analysis is not that difficult, actually, it's all about asking questions, asking open-ended questions related to your hypotheses so that you will be able to validate them. And once you validate those hypotheses, now comes a time you can provide a solution and an offer. I don't know if you noticed, but like I was talking about the car sale, go into a car, selling that car, you start off with giving a proposal and you expect a counter offer, etc. But in this stage, when you use the system 2 thinking, the process is a 4-step approach. You start off with converting your case into a question, finding a solution or a hypothesis, trying to validate that during the course of negotiation, and finally making that offer. So it comes at the end of these 4 steps. Let me give you an example because I think that will be a better way to kind of relate to this. Let's go back to our car case. The car case, let's start with number 1. Let's put this into a question format and say, how can I sell my car above market price today? Right? So now this is a question that I am now going to explore. I am going to explore so that I find I come up with a solution which I need to validate during the course of my negotiation. Now, once I have this question, then I can come up with my first hypotheses. And that could be something like that, something along the lines where perhaps say something like, let me position my car as one of a kind. Okay, so if I find a solution and go to my prospect saying this is a one-of-a-kind car, they might buy it. But the question now I have is, what am I going to validate? Right? I just can't stick to this. I need to find some sub-hypotheses to validate. And these could be along the lines of this. For example, it could be that the car that I own is not really available by everybody else. So it's hard to find. And during the course of negotiation, if I figure out with my questions that my car is hard to find, then I can probably position my car as one of a kind. Let me kind of devise another one. For example, I could say the condition of my car is in good condition, right? So the low mileage, etc. Perhaps this is an area that my prospect is interested in, so I can kind of validate this sub-hypotheses and then position my car as a one-of-a-kind. Or another sub-hypothesis could be the accessories of my car. Say I have, for example, snow tires. They can't come in standard, for example. So those are accessories that I'm willing to give away. In my, again, validation process, if those are unique to me and it's really something that the prospect is interested with, then why not? I can maybe move along this direction. Now, the key here is that during the negotiation process is I need to validate all these with my questions. For example, if the prospect I'm talking says, there are a lot of cars just like yours. I've seen like 12 or 13 in the last 2 weeks. And this is obviously nothing that I should be kind of conveying as a message to my prospect. Or they might say, I'm not really interested in the car tires or anything, or snow tires or anything like that. I just want the car. Perhaps, again, this is an area that I should not explore more in detail. Whereas if they, for example, say, I am really interested in the low mileage. I don't want to have a car that has had a lot of repairs. So I want something that in good condition. Perhaps this is the type of car that I should be going after. This is the type of conversation that I should be having. So maybe this is how I would position my argument. Now, by positioning my argument along these paths, then I can relate to saying that, my car is one of a kind because it's in good condition, low mileage, and has had no repairs. So now it's starting to make sense to my prospect, and it gives me now the opportunity to go after the analysis to make a proposal. And my proposal will be quite straightforward. I'll probably say, since it's in good condition, low mileage, has had no repairs, it's a one-of-a-kind car, and the price I'm asking for is $20,000 US. Maybe the market value is $18,000, $18,500. But I now am confident to ask for $20,000. Mark, does this make sense? Is this do you see the that I'm following right now?
Yeah, I think the example of a used car sale is helpful, but I'm wondering how do you apply this to complex business negotiations? Is there a way to? It's a lot to think of. How do you begin to organize it?
Okay, excellent question. Thank you very much for that. Now, first of all, the reason why I gave the car is that all of us are kind of accustomed to this, and we one time or another probably will witness this or has already witnessed such an experience. But your question is to the point primarily because, yes, what happens in a complex negotiation situation? Now,
well, actually, Erhan, my question was more about just from a planning standpoint. There's a lot to keep track of in complex negotiations, but how do you organize all of that prior to a negotiation?
Great question. Thank you, Mark. Okay. So basically, this is what you need to do. You need to have what we call a planner. Just like the question that you asked at the beginning, you need to have a structured planner in place to be able to capture your thinking process. The idea that with the planner is coupled. First of all, you need to frame your thinking because it doesn't really come naturally when you are starting a negotiation or even when you are planning for a negotiation. What doesn't come naturally? Basically, these 4 steps, right? Especially coming up with these hypotheses is not something that people can do it easily. Therefore, you do need something as a guide that keeps you on track and frames your thinking process. Because this could really go out of, let's say, perspective, primarily because you could be entangled in a lot of detail. The beauty of a planner would be to help you guide your thinking process. The other beauty, once you plan a frame, you then be able to come up with a solution and an offer. Just like I mentioned earlier, if you can convert your case or your problem into a question and frame that as a question, you can then come up with solutions to that problem. And again, you would need a guide, a planner that will guide you to be able to do that. The third thing that you will be able to get out of a planner is the analysis stage, meaning what sort of questions should I ask in my negotiation to validate my hypotheses? So again, like I said earlier, it doesn't just happen in the moment. I wish it would. It never does. So even if you're really an expert in negotiating, or if you're really a skillful person in negotiating, it just is not natural. Primarily because we tend to think with our system 1. We want to get it over with. To employ system 2 thinking process, we need to really be conscious of that situation. And to be able to analyze with our questions, we need to prepare for it. And that's why the planner is a crucial instrument in conducting this analysis phase. And last but not least, you need to think about your target, right? So what do you want to achieve? What is the amount that you want to reach is a key question as well. So the planner guides us in terms of putting a frame around our thinking process, especially the case that we have in front of us, and try to convert that into a question. Once we convert into a question, we come up with our hypotheses. Following that, we now have the opportunity to be able to analyze those hypotheses. And last but not least, we can also determine a target and move along those along the lines to be able to succeed in that target. I hope that answers your question, Mark. Does that help?
Yes, that does. So then using that planner, helping to step through that process. And by the way, we'll make the Red Bear negotiation planner available after this session for download. So if anyone wants to use that and try that out, we'll have that available after today's session. So that same 4-step process applies to complex negotiations, and that planner helps you work through it. How much information should you be applying to that 4-step process in a complex negotiation? How far do you go with your hypotheses and sub-hypotheses, and how much do you anticipate? Do you write down specific questions that you might be looking for? Give us a little bit of a sense of how in a complex negotiation that planner gets used.
Yeah. First of all, again, a great question. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Especially in a complex negotiation, planner is compulsory. I'll be very adamant about that, right? So it's compulsory. Let me just, first of all, back off and tell you why it's compulsory. Number one is because in a complex negotiation, usually both parties are not alone. You have a lot of stakeholders that you need to watch out for. For example, if you're a procurement person, you probably have a lot of people in your organization that demand stuff from you, or you go into a negotiation together with them. So you need to be able to align. Again, if you're a seller, you probably have to, again, align with a lot of individuals from your own organization to be able to go into that complex negotiation. Let's also not forget, there are a lot of variables in a complex negotiation. We can talk about, production. We can talk about price. We can talk about payment terms. We can talk about delivery. So there's a humongous amount of variables that you need to consider. And to your question, you have to go in depth, right? With the planner, unfortunately, in a case where you have a complex negotiation, you come up with more than one hypothesis. And for all of those hypotheses, you need to come up with at least 3 or 4 sub-hypotheses. Let me just try to give you an example, okay? And maybe this will clarify also the planning process and how we would be able to approach it. Let's go to a complex negotiation. Let's think about a procurement situation, okay? And this procurement situation would be something like this. I'm going to be buying from a supplier who's a sole supplier of a certain product. Now, if you're dealing with a sole supplier, you for a fact know that it's not an easy situation to be in. You have a lot of pressure internally. People are pushing you to buy that product. And you also probably have a lot of pressure externally from the supplier saying, this is my price. I won't move away from my price. You have to fulfill these, criteria, etc. So they put a lot of pressure on you as well. So how do I deal with that? First, let's go back to our steps. Number one, I have my ingredients, right? The first ingredient is the case in front of me. I need to convert that into a question. And the question I would have is probably something like this. How can I, by staying in line with my budget? So this is the question that I devised. Let me stop here and say something very important. You need to spend a lot of time devising this question. because the question is actually the key in terms of starting this four-step process. If you can devise a question in a format where you cannot think about certain solutions, then you've done a good job with the problem statement or with the problem in front of you in terms of converting into a question. Let's move on to step two. Step two is we're going to create hypotheses. Hypotheses is actually the solution to this, right? What should the solution look like for me? And I'll give you my solution. And let's say my budget is 600,000 or 600K. And this is what I want to achieve. This is the solution. This is the outcome. Now, let me break these down into sub-hypotheses. And the planner would support me in coming up with all these. To make it simple, I'm going to just split into 3 sub-hypotheses. The first could be something like this. The supplier's production line could already be, allotted to me, meaning to my organization. So their production line is geared to produce the products that are to be sold to me. So this is something that I need to validate during the course of my negotiation. If there is no such thing happening, guess what? Then I won't be able to really move along this path. But if I learn in my negotiation, during the analysis phase of my negotiation, meaning asking questions, I can then validate this and perhaps carry the negotiation to my end goal. Now, if this line doesn't work, maybe I can create another one. For example, it could be that the salesperson quota depends on him or her selling to me. If during the negotiation process, during my analysis phase, if I can't validate that, there's no point in even mentioning this or going into more detail with this. Let's put together another one. It could be this organization that is trying to sell to me cannot afford to lose my business for a certain reason. There could be many reasons. So if it turns out that this is also something critical during the phase where I analyze, and guess what? I also now have a situation where those two will help me be able to reach the end solution that I want to reach. Now, do you see what I'm trying to get at, Mark?
Yes, absolutely. It seems critical to really spend a lot of time thinking about that hypothesis and how it relates to what your target is. Where you start with your own interpretation or analysis of your starting point, and then you think about all the different ways that you can get the other side to kind of understand the other side's perspective. So that's great. I appreciate that explanation.
Absolutely. Just one point here. I mean, this is the favorable side of conducting your, let's say, map of ideas using that planner is this also helps you be able to become that chess player that I was talking to you about. Primarily because once you can create this analysis during the negotiation, you also prepare yourself for any surprise that may come up. Because, for example, if you can structure it this way, if somebody says to you, you know what, we can't afford to lose your business, boom. I am now conscious that this is important for them. I hear that clearly and structure my whole thinking process around that. You know why? Because I'm prepared for that. And that delivers something very important for me. That delivers power in a negotiation. So if I can anticipate, or during the analysis stage of my negotiation, I can see where they are coming from, then I will be able to feel confident and also comfortable with the situation that I'm in, and hopefully be able to reach a deal where I benefit but also the other party benefits as well, because that's what I want to achieve. I want to get to that win-win. I do not want to be the only one who's winning in that negotiation. With this strategy in place, I have both parties quite happy leaving that negotiation.
So I have a question for you related to the planning process and also power as well, and how you're analyzing in the negotiation. So from a planning standpoint, thinking about how to get to your target and anticipating some of these hypotheses and what will work and won't work, I would imagine that also comes into your concession strategy, right? Where how you're going to kind of progress, because there is undoubtedly going to be some arm wrestling that goes on, right? So in that arm wrestling, as you're working through these, I would imagine this applies to your concession strategy as well, as applying that chess mentality, correct?
Absolutely. Fabulous question. Thank you for that. Now, as you would recall, once I'm kind of converting this, let's say, question into coming up with certain solutions, let's say we have a couple of other hypotheses here. What this builds on is also on my concession strategy as well. It also helps me in terms of determine what I should give and what I should get in return. Because negotiation, whether we like it or not, like you said, I won't coin the term arm wrestling for that, because if you are structured and if you have a plan, it's basically a give and get approach. Or let me put it into a better context, is exchange of value. That's where you want to end up. But to be able to coin that term, exchange value, rather than arm wrestling, you need to be able to structure the thinking process in a proper manner using the guide that you have, which would be the planner.
Right. And in that process, I know that in Red Bear's workshops, we talk a lot about coming up with, whether it be, elegant negotiables, things that have a high value to the other party, or things that have high value to me that might be low cost for the other party to provide me, or for low cost for me to provide to the other party. So I would imagine this planning applies to sorting those things out and having hypotheses around those high value, low cost items as well, correct?
Absolutely. Let me just kind of put this into let's say a framework, so that I think it's a very important part, by the way, and also falls into all of this thinking process. I'll give you a better idea in terms of how you should think about your concession strategy. Let me try to draw that up for you as well. Now, let's put this into a matrix, okay? And help everyone out in terms of thinking how they would have a concession strategy in place and how they should be able to kind of figure out their hypotheses around the concessions as well. Let's say this is cost line, and this is the value line, okay? So this is high value, high cost, low cost, low value, okay? In this context, what happens is that if you look at this quadrant here, it could be either the seller or the buyer, doesn't really matter. If it could be high value, high cost is usually things that are related to price. Okay. And you don't want to end up there, because this eats up your profitability. For things that are, let's say, high cost to you, but high value to your opponent, yes, that's probably inevitable. You are going to have that discussion, but you don't really want to spend a lot of time here. There are things that are high value to your to the person that you're talking about, but they are low cost to you. This is lovely. I mean, this is where you want to be, actually. If you think about it, for example, if you're a seller, let's put a seller in this case, or even a buyer afterwards. If you're talking to a prospect who values something quite highly, but it costs less for you, we call these elegant negotiables. This is where you want to end up. This is where you want to be able to have your gives. And you need to really spend a lot of time in the planning process trying to come up with these. Again, these are your, let me put it in that context, your hypotheses. What could be an elegant negotiable? How can I position that in my negotiation? Like I said earlier, it just doesn't happen in the moment. You have to plan for these. You have to find those things that are low cost to you, but high value to the person you are negotiating with. And if you can come up with all of these prior to a negotiation, working with your team, then you are better off in terms of achieving a higher profitability. Does that make sense, Mark? Is that clear?
Yeah, that's great. Especially, thinking about salespeople, is that with the inevitable inflation and some price increases and how that gets passed off to customers, or what you ask your customers to absorb of that, there are certain things that perhaps it's quantity or delivery, although we have supply chain issues still to this day, but there's other things that can be guaranteed or thrown in to help offset the cost of that price increase. So that's great. I love that.
Absolutely. You can, for example, support them with training, right? Or provide some sort of a after sales service. Those could be much more valuable than even the price that you are providing. Or you can, for example, I learned, or I had this experience with a client of ours where they said, we provide a package with the logo of our prospect. And that is not a humongous cost to us, but guess what? It's a huge value to the customer that we're dealing with, because we're going to be able to provide them a standard package, which we put a logo of that institution on. There was another one that the other day that I loved a lot, was that, you know what? We've agreed with our customer to have them, place a certain ad in our website, because we're a very strong supplier, and to be able to be, kind of have a relationship with us is quite important for the customer. So we allow them to use our website and, convey their message, their logo, etc., using our website, because we have a lot of people who are going into our website because we are e-commerce, etc. So again, that was an elegant negotiable. It wasn't really, about giving away from price. This is a situation in sales, obviously. It wasn't about giving on price, but it was really finding something that is extremely valuable for the other party and making sure that that also is implemented in a way that is low cost to that individual.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for all of this. We're getting a little bit close to the end of the session, and I don't have any additional questions that have come up, but I think it's great, just to kind of touch on that. The 4-step process that you've laid out is very intuitive and easy to follow. And then, like I said, we'll make the Red Bear Negotiation Planner, which is suited for that process, available after today's session. And I think that folks can use that and hopefully plan very successfully for their negotiations. So thank you for all of that.
Well, I hope I was able to help, because I am quite passionate about this fact that use System 2 cognitive thinking process rather than just being emotional, instinctive, and applying System 1 to negotiations. The System 1 doesn't achieve the results that System 2 would be able to.
That's great. Thank you so much, Erhan. I really appreciate the time you've spent with us today. And
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody who signed on for today's session and who might view it on demand. Feel free to suggest having other team members share this to help them create a standardized process or a structured process for negotiation planning in your organizations. And don't hesitate to reach out to Red Bear for any needs you may have with negotiation training. So thanks again, Erhan, and good day to everyone.
Likewise. Thank you. Good day, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.